Welcome to the story Amnesty by Nadine Gordimer. One of the things that we want to do before we read a story like this is talk about how it connects to our lives. Um, and this story is about someone who moves away and eventually comes back. Uh, and so on the right, off on the Ed Puzzle question, the first one is, what would you miss about a person who moves away? And what might it be like to be reunited? Hello, and welcome to our second story of the year, continuing to focus on our theme and our topic of apartheid and how racism looks in other parts of the country besides the United States. Today's story is called Amnesty by Nadine Gordimer. In this story, you will come across words that are written in Afrikaans, a language developed from Dutch colonists who settled in South Africa. You'll also run into words written in Xhosa, a native South African language. Use your context clues and what you know from previous stories to help you kind of make sense of those words and what they might mean. I think a safe place to start is here. So what does it mean to be granted amnesty? Amnesty is a general pardon for offenses, especially political offenses against a government, often granted before any trial or conviction. So in terms of law, it's an act of forgiveness for past offenses, especially to a class of persons as a whole, a forgetting or overlooking of any past offense. So in this first part, what you'll read is the narrator learning that her fiancé has recently been released from prison. She describes what her own life has been like while waiting for his return. Amnesty by Nadine Gordimer. When we heard he was released, I ran all over the farm and through the fence to our people on the next farm to tell everybody. I only saw afterwards that I'd torn my dress on the barbed wire, and there was a scratch with blood on my shoulder. He went away from this place 8 years ago, signed up to work in town with what they call a construction company, building glass walls up to the sky. For the first 2 years, he came home for the weekend once a month and 2 weeks at Christmas. That was when he asked my father for me, and he began to pay. He and I thought that in 3 years he would have paid enough to get us married. But then he started wearing that t-shirt. He told us he'd join the union. He told us about the strike, how he was one of the men who went to talk to the bosses because some others had been laid off after the strike. He's always been good at talking, even in English. He was the best at the farm school. He used to read the newspapers the Indian wraps soap and sugar in when you buy at the store. There was trouble at the hostel where he had a bed, and riots over paying rent in the townships, and he had told me, just me, not the old ones, that wherever people were fighting against the way we are treated, that they were doing it for all of us, on the farms as well as the towns, and the unions were with them. He was with them, making speeches, marching. The third year, we heard he was in prison, instead of getting married. We didn't know where to find him until he went on trial. The case was heard in a town far away. I couldn't go off into the court because by that time I had passed my standard 8 and I was working in the farm school. I'd like to pause here for just a second and talk about what standard 8 is. Standard 8 is a test that needs to be passed, and it's essentially the top level of elementary school. She has enough knowledge to pass elementary school. Continuing back with the story. Also, my parents were short of money. 2 of my brothers, who had gone away to work in the town, didn't send home. I suppose they lived with girlfriends and had to buy things for them. My father and other brother work here for the boer, which is essentially like a Dutch um, landowner, I suppose. Uh, and pay is very small. We have 2 goats, a few cows we're allowed to graze, and a patch of land where my mother can grow vegetables. No cash from that. Pay close attention to this paragraph. When I saw him in the court, he looked beautiful in a blue suit with a striped shirt and brown tie. All the accused, his comrades, he said, were well dressed. The union bought the clothes so that the judge and the prosecutor would know that they weren't dealing with stupid yes boss black men who didn't know their rights. I'd like to pause here for just a second. This yes boss, it's basically yes men. They weren't just dealing with yes men who didn't know the rights and would just go along with whatever was told. If they looked sharp, they would be taken more seriously. Continuing on here. These things and everything else about the court and trial he explained to me when I was allowed to visit him in jail. Our little girl was born while the trial went on, and when I brought the baby to court the first time to show him, his comrades hugged him and then hugged me across the barrier of the prisoner's dock, and they had clubbed together to give me some money as a present for the baby. He chose the name for her, Nkulu Leku. Kulu, which should sound familiar from our previous story, The Typewriter, means freedom in Xhosa. So this is the paragraph that I wanted you to pay close attention to, because there will be a question on Ed Puzzle right off to your right. Continuing on. Then the trial was over and he got 6 years. He was sent to the island. The island is actually similar to a prison like Alcatraz at a place called Robben Island. It's a prison obviously off on an island offshore. Prisoners can't leave. They try to swim, they're eaten by sharks or have to swim super far ways away, and it just won't work. So he got 6 years at the island. We all knew about the island. Our leaders had been there so long. But I could have never seen the sea except to color it in blue at school, and I couldn't imagine a piece of earth surrounded by it. I could only think of a cake of dung dropped by the cattle, floating in a pool of rainwater they'd crossed. The water showing the sky like a looking-glass blue. I was ashamed only to think that. He had told me how the glass walls showed the pavement trees and the other buildings in the street and the colors of the cars and the clouds as the crane lifted him out on a platform higher and higher through the sky to work at the top of a building. He was allowed to write 1 letter a month. It was my letter because his parents didn't know how to write. I used to go to them where they worked on another farm to ask what message they wanted to send. The mother always cried and put her hands to her head and said nothing. And the old man, who preached to us in the veld every Sunday, said, "Tell my son we are praying. God will make everything all right for him." Once he wrote back, "That's the trouble. Our people on the farms. They're told God will decide what's good for them, so they won't find the force to do anything to change their lives." This is where I'd like to pause and have you look to the right for Ed Puzzle questions. In this next section, starting with after 2 years had passed, we learn that the narrator and her fiance's parents tried to visit this fiance on Robben Island. Something prevents them, however, from seeing the fiance. You're going to learn what that is in this section. So it begins here. After 2 years had passed, we, his parents and I, had saved up enough money to go to Cape Town to visit him. We went by train and slept on the floor at the station and asked the way next day to the ferry. People were kind. They all knew if you wanted to ferry, it was because you had somebody of yours on the island. And there it was. There was the sea. It was green and blue, climbing and falling, bursting white, all the way to the sky. A terrible wind was slapping it this way and that. It hid the island, but people like us, also waiting for the ferry, pointed where the island must be, far out in the sea, and I never thought it would be like it really was. There were other boats and ships as big as buildings that had to go to other places all over the world, but the ferry is only for the island. It doesn't go anywhere else in the world, only to the island. So everybody waiting there was waiting for the island. There could be no mistake we were not in the right place. We had sweets and biscuits, trousers, and a warm coat for him. A woman standing with us said we wouldn't be allowed to give him the clothes. And I wasn't wearing any more the old beret pulled down over my head that farm girls wear. I had bought relaxer cream from the men who come around the farm selling things out of a box on his bicycle, and my hair was combed up thick under my flowered scarf that didn't cover the gold-colored rings in my ears. His mother had her blanket tied round her waist over her dress. A farm woman, but I looked just as good as any of the girls there. When the ferry was ready to take us, We stood all pressed together and quiet like the cattle waiting to be let through the gate. So you notice here that she really dresses up. She spends time on her makeup. She spends time on her hair. All of these things are important because she wants to look good for her fiance. One man kept looking around with his chin moving up and down. He was counting. He must have been afraid there were too many to get on and he didn't want to be left behind. We all moved up to the policeman in charge, and everyone ahead of us went on that boat. But when our turn came and he put out a hand for something, I didn't know what. We didn't have a permit. We didn't know that before you come to Cape Town, before you come to the ferry for the island, you have to have a police permit to visit a prisoner on the island. I tried to ask him nicely. The wind blew the voice out of my mouth. We were turned away. We saw the ferry rock, bumping the landing where we stood, moving, lifted and dropped by the water, getting smaller and smaller, until we didn't know if we were really seeing it or one of the birds that looked black, dipping up and down out there. Please pay particular close attention to this next paragraph. The only good thing was one of the other people took the sweets and biscuits for him. He wrote and said that he got them, but it wasn't a good letter. Of course not. He was cross with me. I should have found out. I should have known about the permit. He was right. I bought the train tickets. I asked him where to go for the ferry. I should have known about the permit. I have passed my standard 8. There was an advice office to go into in town. The church ran it, he said, or he wrote. But the farm is so far from town. We on the farms didn't know about these things. It was as he said, our own ignorance is the way we are kept down. This ignorance must go. This paragraph kind of shows a realization that the narrator comes to. You can see that she's kind of childish. She says, I should have known, I've passed my standard 8, as if for some reason that, allows her to know about the rules and regulations about getting to Robben Island. But more importantly, what she does learn is about how this ignorance that she feels, like I should have known, I didn't know, why didn't I know? Well, it's because of where she is kept and how far away she is from anything of perceived importance. She's just out on the farm. She's controlled by the government, and the government keeps her ignorant, so she can't know and can't go see her fiance on the island. And that is what this fiance is fighting. Continuing on here. We took the train back, and we never went to the island. We never saw him in the 3 more years he was there. Not once. We couldn't find the money for the train. His father died, and I helped his mother from my pay. For our people, the worry is always money, I wrote. When will we ever have enough money? Then he sent such a good letter. That's what I'm on the island for. Far away from you. I'm here so that one day our people will have the things they need. Land, food, the end of ignorance. There was something else. I could just read the word power. The prison had blacked out. All his letters were not just for me. The prison officers read them before I could. So his letters aren't being directly sent to this woman, the narrator, his fiance. The prison guards are reading them first, and they're blacked out the word power. That might trigger something for you from the previous story. They were looking for sort of these buzzwords that might suggest that there was going to be a protest, that there was going to be an uprising of some sort. Power to the people was sort of a battle cry, I suppose, for the black community of South Africa. That was sort of their rise, that was used to rile up and fire up this group for protest and fighting back. And so if they could black that out, the message maybe wouldn't be the same? Question mark? Seems odd, but that's how they approached it. So in this next section of text, the focus will be on 5 years later. The fiance, the one who was in prison, has finally returned home. And what the focus will be how easy it will be for the couple to resume their relationship. Um, 5 years is a long time, but note that she feels like he was coming home after only 5 years. She didn't know. She felt like it was going to be a lot longer, but it actually it's been 5 years. So think of this as a flash forward. That's what it seemed to me when I heard. The 5 years was suddenly disappeared. Nothing. There was no whole year still to wait. I showed our little girl his photo again. She told the other children at school, "I've got a daddy," just as she showed off about the kid goat she had at home. We wanted him to come at once, and at the same time we wanted him to prepare. His mother lived with one of his uncles. Now that his father was dead, there was no house of his father for him to take me to as soon as we were married. If there had been time, my father would have cut poles, my mother and I would have baked bricks, cut thatch, and built a house for him and me and the child. We were not sure that day what day he would arrive. We only heard on my radio his name and the names of some others who were released. Then, at the Indian store, I noticed the newspaper, The Nation, written by black people, and on the front a picture of a lot of people dancing and waving. I saw at once it was at the ferry. Some men were being carried on other men's shoulders. I couldn't see which one was him. We were waiting. The ferry had brought him from the island, but we remembered Cape Town as a long way from us. Then he did come. On a Saturday, no school, so I was working with my mother, hoeing and weeding round the pumpkins and maize. My hair, that I had meant to keep nice, was tied in an old doek. A doek is similar to a headscarf. Okomi came over the veld, and his comrades had brought him. I wanted to run away and wash, but he stood there stretching his legs, calling, "Hey, hey," with his comrades making a noise around him, and my mother started shrieking in the old style, "Aye, aye," and my father was clapping and stamping towards him. So in this next couple lines, we're going to compare and contrast sort of the differences between who they were then and who they were now, that being the narrator and the fiance. The next couple lines will give some details about the fiance, we'll give some details about her, and we'll start to see some differences between who they are at this point. He held his arms open to us, this big man in town clothes, polished shoes, and all the time while he hugged me I was holding my dirty hands full of mud away from behind his back. So if you can picture that, they're hugging, but she's kind of straight-armed out behind his back because she didn't want her muddy hands to dirty up his town clothes and polished shoes. So in that section, this is where you should see a question to the right about some differences between him and her. You should be able to infer those differences. His teeth hit me hard through his lips. He grabbed at my mother, and she struggled to hold the child up to him. I thought we would all fall down. Then everyone was quiet. The child hid behind my mother. He picked her up, and she turned her head away to her shoulder. He spoke to her gently, but she wouldn't speak to him. "She's nearly 6 years old. I told her not to be a baby. She said, 'That's not him.'" What's interesting here is that it's moments like this that a child's insight is sort of the most telling. It's the most mature. It's the most... It grabs the moment the best. She looks at him and goes, "That's not my dad," even though it obviously is. She doesn't feel that way because it's been so long and he looks so much different and she's just not used to him. And really we're going to start to see the narrator feeling like this isn't the man that I'm supposed to marry. This isn't the father of my child. He's a different person than he once was. Because you can start to see back in these lines how different they are. The comrades all laughed. We laughed. She ran off, and she said, "She has to have time to get used to me." He has put on weight. Yes, a lot. You couldn't believe it. He used to be so thin, his feet looked too big for him. I used to feel his bones, but now, that night, when he lay on me, he was so heavy, I didn't remember what it was. I didn't remember it was like that. Such a long time. It's strange to get stronger in prison. I thought he wouldn't have enough to eat and would come out weak. Everyone said, "Look at him. He's a man now." He laughed and banged his fist on his chest and told them how the comrades exercised in their cells. He would run 3 miles a day, stepping up and down in one place on the floor of that small cell where he was kept. After we were together at night, we used to whisper a long time, but now I can feel he's thinking of other things, and I don't know. And I can't worry him with talk. I'm gonna start that again. I'm sorry. Um, we used to whisper a long time, but now I can feel he's thinking of some things that I don't know, and I can't worry him with talk. Like she doesn't feel educated enough to discuss with him these whatever it is that he's thinking about, whatever it is that he's talking about, which we can sort of infer are the protests, are this revolution, this fight against apartheid. Also, I don't know what to say. To ask him what it was like, 5 years shut away there, or to tell him something about school or about the child. What else has happened here? Nothing. Just waiting. Sometimes in the daytime, I do try to tell him what it was like for me, here at home on the farm. 5 years. He listens, and he's interested. Just like he's interested when people from the other farms come to visit and talk to him about the little things that happened to them while he was while he was away all the time at the island. Now, here's another section, starting with "he smiles," down to 2, that I want you to pay close attention to, because what's going to happen is we are going to look at what the narrator might be saying in the last sentence. Almost like she's changing her mind, changing her tone, questioning this existence of hers. He smiles and nods, asks a couple of questions, and then stands up and stretches. I see it's to show them it's enough. His mind is going back to something he was busy with before they came. And we farm people are very slow. We tell things slowly. He used to, too. So he kind of gives that signal of, all right, I'm done here. It's time for me to move on. I'm gonna go do other things. Worry about this other thing that seems to be going on that she can't quite put in words because the author hasn't put it in words. But she knows it's something bigger, something more. And she just knows that she's a farm person. And we farm people are very slow. We tell things slowly. He used to, too. But now, he's different. He hasn't signed on for another job, but he can't stay at home with us. We thought after 5 years over there in the middle of that green and blue sea, so far, he would rest with us a little while. The Comey or some cars would come fetch him, and he says, "Don't worry, I don't know what day I'll be back." At first, I asked, "What week?" "Next week?" He tried to explain to me. In the movement, oh, so there we get a little bit of insight into what this is. It's the movement. It's not like it was in the Union, where you do your work every day and after that you are busy with meetings. In the movement, you never know where you will have to go and what's going to come up next. And the same with the money. In the movement, it's not like a job with regular pay. I know that. He doesn't have to tell me that. It's like it's like it was going to the island. You do it for all our people who suffer because we haven't got money, we haven't got land. Look, he said, speaking of my parents, my home, the home that has been waiting for him with his child. Look at this place, where the white man owns the grounds and lets you squat in mud and tin huts, here only as long as you work for him. So we've got a bit of dissension here, a bit of disagreement in how they view things. He views it as very like they're slaves. Um, it's white man owned, but you can squat here in the mud with your tin huts as long as you're working for him. But she's kind of proud of it. He says, or she says, "Look," he said, "speaking of my parents, my home, the home that has been waiting for him, we've been waiting patiently for him with his child." So we kind of see that contrast here in how they view um, this land. Baba and your brother planting his crops and looking after his cattle. Mama cleaned his house, and you in the school without even having the chance to train properly as a teacher. The farmer owns us, he says. I've been thinking we haven't got a home because there wasn't a time to build a house before he came to the island. But we haven't got a home at all. But now I've understood that. I'm not stupid. When the comrades come to this place in the Comey to talk to him here, I don't go away with my mother after we've brought them tea, or, if she's made it for the weekend, beer. They like her beer. They talk about our culture, and there's one of them who makes a point of putting his arm around my mother, calling her the mama of all of them, the mama of Africa. Sometimes they please her very much by telling her how they used to sing on the island and getting her to sing an old song we all know from our grandmothers. Then they join in with their strong voices. My father doesn't like this noise traveling across the veld. He's afraid that if the Boer finds out my man is a political from the island, and he's holding up meetings on the Boer's land, he'll tell my father to go and take his family with him. But my brother says if the Boer asks anything, just tell him it's a prayer meeting. Then the singing is over. My mother knows she must go away into the house. I stay. I listen. This is another section where we'd like you to synthesize what's being said and come up with an answer. An answer to this question. What can you tell about the fiance's opinion of the narrator? Here we start to get an idea of what the fiance thinks of this narrator. Next few lines here. I'll stop when you can be ready to answer the question over on Edpuzzle. He forgets I'm there when he's talking and arguing about something that I can see is important. More important than anything we could have ever say to each other when we're alone. But now and then, when one of the other comrades is speaking, I see him look at me for a moment in a way that I will look up at one of my favorite children in school and encourage the child to understand. So his opinion comes through right here. When one of the other comrades is speaking, I see him look at me for a moment the way I will look at one of my favorite children in school to encourage the child to understand. So he's kind of giving her a look, and notice one of my favorite children. So he looks fondly upon her, he still appreciates her, he still seems to love her, and it's just kind of this look like, please understand. Please get that this is important to me. Please understand what's going on here. The men don't speak to me, and I don't speak. One of the things they talk about is organizing the people on the farms, the workers, like my father and brother, and like his parents used to be. I learn what all these things are: minimum wage, limitation of working hours, the right to strike, annual leave, accident compensation, pensions, sick, and even maternity leave. I am pregnant. At last I have another child inside me. But that's women's business. When they talk about the big men, the old men, I know who they are. Our leaders are also back from prison. I told him about the child coming. He said, and this one belongs to a new country. He'll build the freedom we've fought for. I know he wants to get married, but there's no time for that at present. There was hardly time for him to make the child. He comes to me just like he comes here to eat a meal or put on clean clothes. He picks up the little girl, swings her round, and there, it's done. He's getting into the Comey. He's already turning to his comrade that face of his that only knows what's inside his head. Those eyes that move quickly as if he's chasing something you cannot see. The little girl hadn't had time to get used to this man, but I know she'll be proud of him one day. So the narrator's having a really hard time with this. You can kind of sense when she falls into like, how could he be this way? And I'm really proud of him. I hope his daughter's proud of him. This easy. I want to marry him. But then sometimes like, he just doesn't make time for me. But I know someday he'll be proud of me. How can you tell that to a child 6 years old? But I tell her about the big men and the old men, our leaders, so she'll know that her father was with them on the island. This man is a great man too. On Saturday, no school, and I plant and weed with my mother. She sings, but I don't. I think. On Sunday, there's no work, only prayer meetings out of the farmers' way under the trees, and beer drinks at the mud and tin huts where the farmers allow us to squat on their land. I go off on my own as I used to when I was a child, making up games and talking to myself where no one would hear me or look for me. I sit on a warm stone in the late afternoon, high up. The whole valley is a path between the hills, leading away from my feet. This is another section I'd like to pay particular attention to, because you'll have a question based on this next paragraph or so. It's the Boers farm, but that's not true. It belongs to nobody. The cattle don't know that anyone says who he owns it. The sheep, they are gray stones, and then they become a thick gray snake, moving, don't know. Our huts, and the old mulberry tree, and the little brown mat of the earth that my mother dug over yesterday, way down there. And the way over there, the clumps of trees around the chimneys and the shiny thing that is the TV mast of the farmhouse, they are nothing on the back of this earth. It could twitch them away like the dog does a fly. So the question here seems to be, what do you think she is saying about who owns the earth? Does anyone own the earth? How powerful is Mother Nature? I am up in the clouds. The sun behind me is changing the colors of the sky, and the clouds are changing themselves, slowly, slowly. Some are white, blowing themselves up like bubbles. Underneath is a bar of gray, not enough to make rain. It gets longer and darker, while the other clouds are all pink. It grows a thin snout and long body, and then the end of it is a tail. There's a huge gray rat moving across the sky, eating the sky. The child remembered the photo, she said. That's not him. I'm coming here where I came often while he was on the island. I came to get away from the others, to wait by myself. I'm watching the rat. It's losing itself, its shape, eating the sky, and I'm waiting, waiting for him to come back. Waiting. I'm waiting to come back home. One of the skills that we'd like you to work specifically on with this story is making inferences. Remember that an inference is a conclusion that you draw based on evidence in the text. So we want you to make 3 inferences in the story. The first one will be given to you, so you're down to 2. The inference is that the sample given to you is that the fiance is better educated and more ambitious than the narrator. How do you know this? What is in the story that tells you this? The narrator says that her fiance is good at talking, even in English, and that he used to read newspapers used as wrappers for soap and sugar. Your job is to find other things you can say about the story. I talked about a lot of them as they came up in the story. Things like specifically how the narrator feels about her life. The second skill we'd like you to work on today is identifying and using first-person point of view. In the first-person point of view, the narrator is the character in the story who describes the story as he or she perceives and understands it. Using first-person point of view usually ensures that readers will feel close to the narrator, but it also restricts readers to knowing only what the narrator understands and tells them, and no more. In Amnesty, for example, readers don't know what the narrator's fiancé feels each time he leaves his family. In the chart below, list some events and incidents that the narrator of this selection describes. Then briefly explain the narrator's thoughts and feelings about them. An example has been done for you. So you'll need a total of 3, that is 2 more. The first one has been done for you. Story events, the fiancé goes to trial. The narrator's thoughts and feelings about it. The narrator is proud of the way her fiancé is dressed, and she admires him. She does not know exactly what is going on except for what her fiancé tells her. Other things that might come up is how he acts when he's around them, and how it makes, like when he's back at the farm, and how it makes her and the family feel like he used to be one of them, but now he's not. He's something different, he's something more, but he still has an appreciation for it. It's not that he feels he's better than, he's just fighting for, in a way that the narrator maybe can't understand. Once you've had completed these 2 things and answered the questions on the right via Edpuzzle, You have completed the story Amnesty. Completion of the story Amnesty means that you have earned 3 units, and you're on to the next story. With that, I have nothing more to add. Ciao for now.